part of the work, but in your role at Sony Music Group, as its head of philanthropy and social justice, can you speak to the rocket fuel justice has added to the fight for Jedi in corporate America and honestly society at large?
Thank you, Tiffany. And I've really thought about this question a lot since you sent it to us. I think this is a moment for philanthropy to really sort of take a step back and make sure that Jedi, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, and social justice and giving just in general is at the forefront and at the center of our democracy, at the center of change, at the center of corporate America. And if we are really provided with the resources, with the support that we need to affect change within our companies, that's something that Tiffany does on a daily, and looking at how can we make sure that Sony is a very diverse company and everything that entails, and externally in terms of what our team is able to do through our social justice fund, all of our corporate social responsibility, and our COVID fund. So it's really an opportunity to use this moment, especially what we're experiencing now with all of the injustices, and use this moment as a catalyst for change, and making sure that we are working on parallel paths and not excluding any sort of resource points, if you will, so that we can affect change. And I think it's a time as well that we have to really lean in undoing the way that the world is and the way that society is now, and putting in the work to make sure that we are creating real change and real impact in communities. So I'm also going to just refer to my notes because I'm telling you guys my age now. But yeah, I just want to make sure I don't miss any points. Yeah, I think it's just a matter of just assuring that the work that we are doing is meaningful, is impactful, that it's actually changing the way corporate America does business, that it's inclusive, that we are thinking about our employees, that we're thinking about the people that we're working for, and that they are making sure that we feel safe when we come to work. And it's also supporting externally the communities externally that have been historically misrepresented or excluded, making sure that they have the resources to affect change on the ground, looking at our democracy, making sure that we get out and vote. We know the Gen Zers showed up for this midterm election, and there were some expectations, but we said no. We want a fair and just democracy. So I think it's really just making sure that we continue to do the work to propel that type of change that we want to see in society.
And Tuolumne, I want to add, because we often have had discussions about when there's sort of blanket phrases that say corporate America is not showing action or giving. Do you want to talk about the stats and facts for the Global Fund?
Sure. I'm going to get rid of my notes now, guys. But so I can speak within Sony Music Group and within the industry, at least with sort of the big three in music. That's Sony Music Group, Universal, and Warner. With our social justice fund, we have over 400 organizations that we have supported. Within 2 years, we've spent $30 million supporting these communities globally. We definitely look at all of the regions that Sony is doing businesses, and looking at social justice issues and how that shows up globally. Social justice in the Philippines does not look like social justice here in the US, in Europe, and in our offices in London, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, around the 7 regions that we support. So I would say, corporate social responsibility has had a bad rep. I refuse to lean into that narrative because I believe that I know myself and Tiffany and we have our company, Sony, behind us, and they've definitely put their money where their mouth is, and it's our job to make sure that we are using that, those funds to create meaningful change. So within the 3 music groups that I talked about, we have committed over $225 million to corporate social responsibility, and Sony Music Group, I would say, selfishly, is leading those efforts with our grassroots approach to social justice globally. So I implore us to look at what corporate America is doing to continue to hold us accountable, continue to hold them accountable for what they said they were going to do, for the pledges. There's all types of information out there, guys. You guys can go on their websites. I think companies are forced because accountability is a big thing, and people are holding these companies and individuals, even if you look at our politicians, accountable for what they said they were going to do. Absolutely. And the information is there. So if you have questions about what your companies are doing, step up, and really call to action. Ask, hey, what are we doing? How are we being diverse in our companies? What are we doing to impact change in the communities where our businesses are represented and where they're doing business? Because if you don't speak up and you don't, bring these issues to the forefront, as Tanisha said, people will get complacent, and we want to make sure that we are being the accountability police within our corporations and in society.
Thank you, Tuolumne. Thank you. You talked about your history-making run as the Secretary of State for Massachusetts. Woo! And actually, at an event that you did in New York City, I learned how important that role was. I think we often take advantage when we hear titles like that they're just sort of part of the government, but it's a very, very crucial and important role, and you took on that task to run for that office and really make it an educational campaign as well. But you also, because you're not doing enough in terms of changing the world, head up Boston's NAACP. You have seen and been a part of a lot of change, of course, particularly on the political front. But honestly, I feel like it should be JEDI and, with a V for vote. Voting is the engine for equality in America. What is your view? And you talked about it a little bit, but on the role politics have played in the JEDI movement.
Yeah, it's critically important. And so I believe that for the movement for justice, equity, diversity, inclusion to actually yield the impact that we all are working toward, I believe that civic engagement, voter participation is critically important. And that does mean, to Tuolumne's point, it's important for corporate America to take an active role in civic engagement. A strong democracy goes hand in hand with a strong economy. A strong economy goes hand in hand with a strong democracy. I do want to share a little bit about elected office, because I think it's important for folks to really understand just how unique it is in this moment that we saw so many candidates of color this election cycle. Yeah. This is the first election cycle where we saw people of color running for statewide office in relatively large numbers. That just has not happened historically, and a switch has been flicked, and I'm excited about it. And I want to see more of us running. Higher Heights, which is a national organization focused on supporting Black women who run for office, has a data point. 6 Black women currently this year hold statewide office nationwide. Yes, we can clap on that, but there are over 200 elected office holders at the statewide level. Okay. So we have a lot of work to do. And that is change that we can really help to support at the grassroots level. We've got to see ourselves running, and we've got to support one another when we do. In Massachusetts, which is oftentimes considered to be deep blue, this election cycle, there were 4 women of color who ran for statewide office. Never before had a woman of color run. When I received the endorsement, I ran as a Democrat. When I received the endorsement of the Massachusetts Democratic Party in my race, it was the first time that Massachusetts Democrats, and I'm saying Massachusetts because if you live outside of Massachusetts, you think we've got it going on. But the first time that Massachusetts Democrats had ever endorsed a woman of color for statewide office in 2022. Wow. Okay, so we've got a lot of work to do. So we celebrate the advancement, recognizing how much more there is to do. And for us in Massachusetts, we celebrate the election of Andrea Campbell to Attorney General, the first woman of color to hold statewide office in Massachusetts, the 3rd Black woman to hold the office of Attorney General in the country. So we lift up Andrea as well. All of that to say, I believe that we need to see more of our corporate organizations pushing beyond the 4 walls, right? Okay. So we're doing really good work, I believe, when it comes to internally looking at recruitment, retention, promotion, or at least we're doing better work in that space. But the ability of our organizations to thrive does hinge on how engaged our organizations are externally. And I seek to encourage more organizations to push beyond the initiatives, right? So to push beyond the sponsorship of programs and to look at ways that organizations can become more actively involved in policy making. Okay? Because that's where systemic change happens. And as corporate organizations, we do have the influence and the power in a bipartisan way to help usher in transformative change. What would it look like if our organizations were not just lobbying elected officials with respect to regulatory matters, but we're saying to our elected officials, you know what, we need deeper investment in early childhood education. We need deeper investment in skills training, workforce development. What would it look like if our organization said, you know what, we want to see more active investment in food equity and food justice, right? Like our organizations have a lot of power that could be leveraged differently to usher in greater societal change, and I'd like to see more of that.
Thank you. You know, when we talk about the civic engagement, particularly of companies, there's so many partners here today. There's over 90 plus partners. And many of them have, you know, an incredible opportunity this whole week to be inspired, to go back and push against those 4 walls. I definitely want to get a chance for Bernice to speak about particularly the API community, which for the last 3 years have been through some pretty incredibly tough times, and particularly coming from deep pain that your community has faced. But I believe that the API community is invisible no more because of the work that you do. Your book, The Visibility Mindset, addresses and turns the very notion of invisibility on its head. And what has JEDI meant for you specifically and the creative API community?
I really enjoyed this question. I thought about it all week. And for me, I was thinking the one most pivotal thing for us as a community was to be seen as people of color. And it seems kind of weird and silly that for a long time, I always just assumed I was a person of color. Yeah. But I realized there was a confusion around that. My husband, who is a white man, he actually said, no, you're not. And I was like, then what am I? And I started having this conversation with a lot of people. And some Asians actually do not some do. And the fact that there was a confusion because of how Asians have been seen this whole entire time as this model minority, that we're all highly successful, that we're well educated, and we are high earning, which is a complete myth. We are constantly talking in rooms and spaces where we're educating not only allies, but also Asians. There has been a whole racial reckoning with a lot of us coming into our identity and the struggles we have as a culture. I always try to bring in stats, so there's some supportive evidence, but Asian American men at 20% fundamentally feel like they don't belong in the room, and that's 16% of Asian women. That's more than any other class. Harvard Business Review says we're least likely to be promoted to managers. The poorest people ethnically in New York are 29.8% are Asians. And because of a lot of these myths and these biases, we don't count for subsidies, we're not looked at for help, we're just kind of unseen, and we just have gone invisible. And when my parents
Ryan Coogler. Who's fired up here, Ryan Coogler? And Kiki and Lauren is fire. But I am more excited for you all to see Adrian. She is fierce. She comes from Nike and came to us and chose to join platforms and ecosystems, to shape the way that the platforms and ecosystems look for us. Because in 1999, when Google started, there was nobody like us in that garage. But right now, they're building Web3. They're building the metaverse. They're building AI, and all these things. And if we're not in the room to affect it, it's going to be built again without us. And so that's where I lose the most. Our Googlers are wonderful. They put great work, but how do we get more of us in those rooms, making decisions?
That's amazing. And let's work hard to make sure Michael gets a good night's sleep. Let's be more tech equitable. Davian, at Sparks and Honey, as its Chief Client Officer and Head of D&I Consulting, which is a really, really powerful combo to note if you're thinking about creating a position like that. But what are the signals, which is very much a Sparks and Honey term, but what are the signals that you're seeing about the true state of Jedi? And should we be concerned, steadied, or hopeful?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll pause for a second just on the role, because I think that sets a stage for the future, as you're asking, and then also a lot of the things that you alluded to, Michael. So my role is both overseeing our client portfolio and working hand in hand with C-suite leaders, with the biggest and largest corporations as they think about business transformation, M&A activity, innovation, really disrupting their own industries. And secondarily, but collectively, I lead our Equitable Futures practice, which is really about centering equity and inclusion into transformation efforts. And so then when I'm having conversations, when we're doing work that's about the future of beauty or healthcare in 2030, for example, we are starting from a place of equity and inclusion and building it into the foundation of the solutions as these leaders think about what's next and how they need to build. And Michael, I think that speaks to what you're saying. It's not an add-on, right? We're not talking about D&I within an HR space, within an internal organizational space, which equally definitely important, but we need to think much more broadly when we talk about equity and inclusion and the future of it. And we can't think about, and Tiffany, you asked about the future, we can't look at equity as extra credit any longer. And unfortunately, that's...
Can you repeat that? For the people in the back.
Equity work is not extra credit, right? And